And pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you are the mighty God, and we thank you that you intend to speak in a way that opens up a new world to us. You show us who you are and what you're like. We would not know if you had not spoken, and we thank you that you speak through the simplicity of your word written, opened up to our hearts by the power of your Spirit at work, setting a spotlight on your grace, your mercy, your character, and your saving plans through your Son. So we're needy people here today. Would you help speaker and hearer alike, that we may be delighted and see you as you are and have our lives embedded in your story. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. One of my favourite little quotes or sentences that I find clarifying is one by an old theologian, long dead now, and he's pretty well known for it. He says this, his name's A.W. Tozer: "What comes into your mind when we think of God is the most important thing about you." Dean! I could put him on the spot, and right now his pulse is beginning to rise because he's going to be, what comes into... Steve's going to say, what comes into your mind when you think of God? And you'll know some stuff, so I've given you some thinking time. What comes straight in? Holiness. Wow. Mel! What comes into your mind when you think of who God is? You don't have to answer. I'm feeling merciful. I was sitting the other night having a meal with some of my cycling buddies, most of whom have got no experience. They wouldn't know one end of the Bible from the other. They don't know what it means to be a Christian. But don't think they don't have ideas about who God is like. And don't you dare think that they are not prepared to tell me. Because everybody who's not an expert thinks that they are. And I'm not saying you have to be an expert, but there's a sense in which we realise that the claim that there is a living God matters. The question then becomes, if there is a living God, what is he really like? Because, as A.W. Tozer says, what comes into your mind when we think of God is the most important thing about us. And then I thought again about my friends as we were sitting and talking, and I thought about my levels of nervousness about speaking to them about the living God, not because I know him not to be wonderful, but because they will have a distortion in their mind. And it tends to be around a perception that God is an angry man in the sky. Have you ever come across that kind of perception? Now, number one, he's not in the sky. Number two, he is not a man. And number three, he is angry. But our problem is that we think of God's anger in the way that we think of our anger. Has anybody been angry this week? Yeah, of course you have. I'm angry that some of you are lying right now. I'm going to put you into two categories. When we get angry, usually it comes out in one or two ways. And I'm pretty sure, for those of you who I know reasonably well, I've already got your number on this. What are the two ways? We're either venters, do you know what I'm talking about? Or stuffers. Now, I actually think stuffers are the more dangerous, because venters, it's all out there, you know what you're dealing with, and it's gone. No, venters. They're the ones who, if they've got a problem with you, they drive past your house at 2 o'clock in the morning with a little voodoo doll of you and stab it. Well, maybe they don't actually do that in reality. They just do that in their heart. Oh, hi, how are you? Fine. And we tend to think as if God is like us in his anger. Now, let me tell you why it's good news that God is angry. It is good news that God is angry because if he wasn't angry, would he be good? Would he be good when he sees the way that people treat each other? Would he be good when he sees the injustices if he wasn't angry and says, oh, they didn't really mean it, when everybody knows they did? Would he be good if he passed over crimes? Would he be good if in a world where he is supreme, people step to him in a treacherous and treasonous manner and he just goes, oh, God. No, our only hope is the anger of God, because the anger of God is a guarantee that wrongs will be righted. Can I say that again? The anger of God is the guarantee that wrongs will be righted one way or another. If he's not angry, he is not good. But of course, on Friday night, when everybody's had a couple of bottles of beer, I can't get that across to my mates. And they will stay stuck in a perception that God is a God of bad anger. And the reason we're worried about that is because we've all been receiving on the end of bad anger. You've probably dished out a fair amount of bad anger. The Lord never has. We sang that song earlier for a reason. The Lord is gracious and compassionate. What's the next bit? Slow to anger. He never gets out of bed on the wrong side. But when his anger is stirred and aroused, it will be telling you something good that he is about to be doing. And that's why Isaiah is so useful to us in the midst of this situation, because what he does is reminds us that God isn't either embarrassed or confused about being God. We may be a bit confused, we may even be a bit embarrassed, but God isn't, because he knows that the very greatest and best thing in existence, not inside the universe, but in existence, is him. And when he is near and at work doing his thing, and as people are drawing near to him, that's where life happens. That's where joy breaks in. That's why one of the reasons week by week we're always saying, lean into the Lord. Because when you know and come near him, it will be unsettling, but it will be life-giving. And unfortunately, we come to a place in Scripture where the people have utterly rejected that. There are 3 sections in this little bit here. You'll remember that we've been talking about the season, the geopolitical movements in the area of Israel, Judah, with a couple of nations above, and then the big bully boys above them, the Assyrians, and everything is all hitting the fan. It's round about 730 BC. And so what's happening is the lower part of God's kingdom, where Jerusalem is, where the line of the Davidic kings are ruling, they are disobeying God, but they're not as bad as their big brother above them, which is the other tribe, sometimes called Ephraim, sometimes called Israel, the other 11 tribes, and they departed from the Lord decades ago. All of their kings were scumbags. All of them. All of them loved idolatry, were oppressive to their people, and totally dishonoured all of God's faithfulness to them down through the centuries. And this little bit is turning towards addressing them. So let's see what makes God angry so that we can learn from it and run to him for mercy. So if you're there in chapter 9, we'll find it. Oh, sorry, I should say, we're going to do this by, and I'm going to look at this whole issue of God's anger in 3 categories. The goodness of his anger, the sovereignty of his anger, and the ultimate of his anger. The goodness of his anger, the sovereignty of his anger, the ultimate of his anger. And I wanted to start by saying this just before we get into the text. Are you angry at cancer? I'm guessing you are. It destroys life. It eats people up. It breaks and shatters relationships. It removes options and choices. We're angry at a bad thing that is there that destroys life. Would you be angry if there was somebody who could deal with a person's or the broader issue as a whole and they just did nothing? Of course you would. And what we're talking about here is into a nation where a spiritual cancer has taken root in the hearts of people that is having massive impacts outwardly, denying them future, and so the Lord wants to bring the chemo. That's what's happening between chapter 9, verse 8, and chapter 10, verse 4. Let's see it in action. Okay? The Lord has sent a message against Jacob, and it will fall on Israel, the sort of big brother of Judah in the south. All the people will know it, Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria, who say with, what do they say it with? Pride and with arrogance of heart. So what is the big problem? What's the spiritual cancer? They are too big for their boots. They have haughty eyes and are judging others. And the way that it's seen here is really interesting, because over the previous decades, God had been poking at them with the kind of things that he had said previously in his word would be the indicators that they're walking out and walking away from him. And he'd been jabbing them, and it was making life difficult for them, but look what their solution is. What should have been their solution? Receive God's gracious rebuke to come back to him, but instead, they totally disregard him and ignore him, and they say, the bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with dressed stone. What does that sound like? Anybody heard a politician say a variant on that phrase? What's the phrase? Build back better. And that, in and of itself, sounds incredibly optimistic and overcoming, but it is a refusal to live with an awareness that the biggest and most powerful reality and the point of your existence is to know the living God. So look at them. They're planning everything except how to relate to him. The fig trees that have been felled, but we will replace them with cedars, which are bigger trees. But the Lord has strengthened Rezin's foes against them and has spurred their enemies on. Arameans from the east and the Philistines from the west have devoured Israel with open mouth, yet for this his anger is not turned away. In other words, he's going to confound their attempt to build out, yet again, build God out of their life. It is a kind of arrogance. It lives as if we're in this closed system and there is no living God. Now that can happen at a national level. It can happen in a church where we try to take matters into our own hands to protect even what we think are his interests. And it can happen in your life. Oh no, I'm going to be one of those overcomers. Oh, this thing has brought me down, but I'm not going to let the beggars get me down. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to march forward without ever slowing down and asking this simple question. Is there the possibility that in the midst of this difficulty, the Lord is trying to draw me back to him? Have you ever noticed that when you call them back from something and they don't listen, you call them back gently, does the volume of your voice go up or down? If they are dumb enough to not listen, the Lord is going to shout louder because he has a good purpose. He wants them to walk as his people. But notice how that arrogance is developing in the next few verses. There's this interlude, yet for all this, his anger is not turned away, his anger is still upraised. And that comes up 4 times, and there's a different element of the way they're just living as if they are God at every point. The second way is found in verses 13 and following. It's their arrogance. But the people have not returned to him who struck them. So he's admitting, in love I struck you to draw you back that you may have life, and I've struck you, and you're still saying that I'm a nothing burger. You're not returning to me. Nor have they sought the Lord Almighty. So the Lord will cut off from Israel both head and tail, both palm branch and reed in a single day. The elders and the prominent men are the head, and the prophets who teach lies are the tail. In other words, there's beliefs in the land that just totally deny who God is. Does that sound familiar to us? So they turn on their social media, they turn on their news, they watch their soap operas, and it's not that God is bad-mouthed. It's not that he's mentioned in a bad way. It's what? He's not even mentioned. They live in a closed system. And they've got people who are influencers speaking about that. And when I say speaking about that, speaking like that. And the Lord's like, what do I have to do to get them to realize that I'm the Lord of life? I'm going to have to churn up. I'm going to have to do something. I am angry because I'm not confused about whether I'm glorious in the Lord of life. But they are, and their posture and their actions is against me. Verse 17, therefore the Lord will take no pleasure in the young men, nor will he pity the fatherless and the widows. For everyone is ungodly and wicked. Every mouth speaks vileness. There is no sense of limitation on them. They've all been corrupted a little bit. There's a sense in which you know, we have that phrase, don't we? Oh, they got in with the bad crowd. They're all the bad crowd. But the only people who don't realise that are them. They're wrong uns, as we'd say in speak. And they don't even know it. So why is it that God's anger is aroused? Because he is the most important reality. And to not acknowledge that is treasonous. He doesn't matter to them. You guys are coming up on Christmas season, aren't you? You know what's going to happen. You're already having to start the negotiation process as to which family members you're going to spend a little bit of time with on which day and how long. And we all know that they get in touch with each other and compare. Which of us have got the guts to not turn up at the family member that we really don't want to have to turn up to? Because we know what will get said to us, and it will be something along these lines with some choice expletives in the middle. It will be, obviously I don't matter to you. Because you haven't given them the time. Obviously, he doesn't matter to them. Now, you can do that with a crotchety old relative. I'd probably suggest you don't. That's my pastoral advice. But try doing that to the one whose oxygen you're breathing, who is the most glorious. Trying to live without God is trying to live as God. And that's not going to go very well for very long. It talks more in the next few verses about their arrogance that is building. Down in chapter 10 we find, woe to those who make up unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees to deprive the poor of their rights. Can I tell you and point out, God is very passionate about justice, and he's noticed that when there is worldview creep to a worldview where there is no God, eventually that plays itself out in corruption and the poor being treated the worst. It leads to injustice for women and vulnerable groups. What isn't written in here is that at this particular point in history, the northern tribes of God's people, were even engaging in child sacrifice to foreign idols and gods. And in the midst of that, the Lord says, you've got a problem. Because even though I'm bringing this upon you, yet for all this, his anger is not turned away. His hand is still upraised. Now, his anger is good because he is against stuff that rips up the fabric of the world. He is against pride. He is against anything that denies us flourishing as he intends us to. 4 times it says his anger is not turned away. And the reason for that is because the God of the Bible, his feelings on these matters don't just evaporate. Have you ever seen somebody angry and say, oh, calm down, they'll get over it? No, he is eternally present in every moment of our time. He can't get over it. His anger and his arm is upraised against all that is defiant and ugly and in denial of who he is. So these people have got a problem. But can I tell you, the fact that God notices this means that his anger is good. Because it's only to an even-handed, right amount measure of what is being done by people. And I rejoice in this. Because I'm really confused about the way the world should be. And on my cocky and arrogant days, I like to think that if I was in control, things would go right. What do you think about that? That is as laughable as if we put Steve or Debbie or Mark or woe betide us my missus in charge. Why is that? Because here is one who sees with eyes of fire, who knows what is done in secret and in the light, who can evaluate in total righteousness. And if he wants to be angry, I say hallelujah. and I put myself in his hands, and I trust his judgments. Because he is a good and gracious God with good anger, the kind of anger that I aspire to. And immediately it tells you, just pastorally speaking, the next time you you'll be in a bonnet about something or somebody, the first posture should be to say, Lord, have mercy on me because I'm not God. Have mercy on me in my anger because I know that I could send this in any kind of direction. I want to echo, and if I do need to be angry, I want it to echo who you are and be under your control and restraint. Secondly, and more quickly, we don't just see the goodness of his anger, we see the sovereignty of his anger. And I love this. So here we are, there's Judah down there, and the northern big brother tribes are there, who the Lord has just given that both barrels to about why his hand is uplifted against them. And now, despite all of what he's brought against them, they're still being stubborn and stiff-necked. And his anger can't evaporate and say, I don't give a rip. So he now says what he's going to do. But he does it with a twist. He turns his attention at chapter 10 and verse 5 to the bigger bully boys above who are called what's their names? The Assyrians. And they've got a very nasty and very proud king. And now the Lord addresses them and says, time to march into battle. Let's find it at chapter 10, verse 5. It's a very strange place that it starts. Woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger, in whose hand is the club of my wrath. I send them against a godless nation. I dispatch him against a people who anger me. So he's saying, right, whistles. Woe to you guys, because I'm about to use you to deal with my people. And the reason he says, woe to you for being used by me to deal with my people, is that you are going to use this as an occasion for your own pride. And what we've got is two intentions or two things going on in that geopolitical situation in that one moment. And we find it here. Look down at verse 7. But this is not what he intends. This is not what he has in mind. His purpose is to destroy, to put an end to many nations. So in other words, God goes, right, Assyrians, you're going to go down and deliver my anger and wrath upon my people who have been unfaithful, have shaken the fist and are destroying themselves. You're going to bring upon them what they deserve. But you're not going to think you're doing that. You're going to think that you're bigging up yourself, bro. You're going to think that this is because you're awesome. And I'm happy for you to think that for a little while. In fact, so much so that we get the self-talk of the leaders and the king of Assyria in the next verse. God knows what they're saying about themselves. So they're all big and cocky, aren't they? Verse 8, are not my commanders all kings, says the king. Has not Calno feared like Carchemish? Is not Hamath like Arpad? And Samaria like Damascus? In other words, here are all of these other nations that I've just gone squish upon because I'm the man. That's what the king of Assyria is thinking. He talks about how he's overrun the foreign gods. In other words, he's a functional atheist. He's like, there's not even the spiritual that can stand against me. Come on, bring your worst. I am awesome. Now, who does this sound like? It sounds like almost any of us who are trying to build up our own self-esteem on the day where we feel rubbish. It's like countless online celebrities, social media influencers, even great nations, a particular recent president of the United States, any number of people who love to get intoxicated with the feeling that they are the big dog. And what's the Lord saying? Think that if you like. In fact, he starts talking to him and he calls him a tool. That's what he calls him. Let's jump down to verse 15. Does the axe raise itself above him who swings it, or the saw boast against him who uses it, as if a rod were to wield him who lifts up, or a club brandish him who is not wood? So I'm thinking of Tom's business in the garden, okay? and he walks into a bomb site of a back garden, and he's given a whole stack of money to go and improve the lie of the land. And in his van is all his tools, and he pulls out his pickaxe. And his pickaxe gets raised up to break down what is just a total bomb site. And then poor Tom's on his lunch break, and he just hears a little whisper, "I'm awesome." And he's like, "Where's that coming from?" And a little mouth has sprung up on the side of the pickaxe. And he's going, "I'm so what?" And Tom's like, "You're an inanimate object. You can't even move on your own. I'm awesome." And that's the level of ludicrousness that is here. The king of Assyria, who thinks he's awesome, and the Lord's like, "Seriously? You're just a tool." And in that moment, we see the ugliness of human pride, don't we? We really like to think we've got more impact. Now, we have got personal responsibility, but that is utterly under the sovereign power of the living God. Some of you have got really annoying bosses, and you're like, "Why is this pain and misery come into my life?" And those bosses are sitting at home going, "I'm the big dog." And you fret and you panic and you worry. There's a bigger dog. Don't you think for a second he might not be doing something through the little dog? Some of us panic and worry as we see the things unravel on our TV screens in the geopolitical situations. We fret for the state of our nation, and we hear all these bold voices of people setting forward a vision and why they're the people to deliver it and why it will bring in utopia. And we sit there going, "This is really bad." And we never question whether or not that might be the Lord using the little pickaxe because he's got a greater purpose. And the little pickaxe doesn't even know that he's being used or she is being used. You see, he is really happy to use even his enemies to fulfill his purpose. He is that at ease and comfortable with himself that he doesn't need to quickly reveal. Have you noticed that when you get the upper hand on somebody, you're really fast to want to let them know? You just love it, don't you? He's so secure in himself, he doesn't need to gloat. He doesn't need to reveal his plans. He just does them. Because he's sovereign and because he rules. Going back to that little bit there, I love it. Does the axe raise itself above him who swings it? Or the saw boast against him who uses it? I think in the ESV it's worded slightly differently, and there's a series of repeated as ifs. And the Lord's going, as if. Now that is the power and might of our God. He uses people in ways they don't even realise, and he does it for his own glory and his own good purpose. You could almost say of the king of Assyria, and this, we've got his self-talk in there and he's singing about his glory. You could almost take that old song that many of you have sung and have heard people sing, "You're so vain." You're so vain. What's the next bit? You're so vain, I bet you. The king of Assyria would read this chapter and go, and we could sing to him, "You're so vain, I bet you think this chapter is about you." Who's this chapter really about? It's about the Lord. So be careful if you have tendencies or aspirations to being the one who will control your world. Sometimes he will even use your arrogance to bring about good purposes in your life and the lives of others. But by the end of this chapter, we discover that a day came when the king of Assyria would be flattened, and flattened he was. So what we've done is we've seen the goodness of God's anger, we've seen the sovereignty of his anger, and we need to see just one more thing, and I'll have to do it very, very briefly because we're overrunning. I want us to see the ultimate of his anger. Look down at verse 20. In that day, the remnant of Israel, the survivors of the house of Jacob, will no longer rely on him who struck them, that's the king of Assyria, but will truly rely on the the Holy One of Israel. So we're being told that although the Assyrians are going to come down and smash to pieces the northern tribes of Israel, and the reason that that's going to happen is because the northern tribes of Israel are trusting in the Assyrian king rather than true living God as their king, a day will come when they will see and experience the error of their ways, and they will in turn return to the living God. This is really tough love. It's more than tough love. It's telling you the story of how messed up sin, defiance, pride, selfishness makes us, so that the Lord has to go to extreme levels to draw us back. He's promising that even though the people have failed monumentally, a day is coming when a remnant, a leftover group of people who want to lean into the Lord will have access to him. Though your people, O Israel, will be like the sand of the sea, only a remnant will return. Destruction has been decreed, overwhelming and righteous. The Lord Almighty, will carry out the destruction decreed upon the lands, but there's going to be a remnant that come back. Therefore, this is what he says to those who are going through that hard time and are going to have to face that. Therefore, this is what the Lord Almighty says. O my people who live in Zion, do not be afraid of the Assyrians who beat you with a rod and lift up a club against you as Egypt did. Very soon my anger against you will end, and my wrath will be directed to their destruction. So what is the posture of God's people when we see that the brokenness of the world is letting loose against us? We're concerned as to whether God is there or not doing anything about it. Will there ever be an end to his hand raised coming against? What is his instruction? Do not be afraid of those bad things coming against you. There is a living God. And he tells us it's going to get pretty extreme before it gets better. If you jump down towards the last few verses there, verse 26, the Lord Almighty will lash them with a whip, as when he struck down Midian. That's what he's going to do to the Assyrian bully boys who come down. And he will raise his staff over the waters as he did in Egypt. So what happened in Midian and Egypt was almost like the Lord stacked it against him. Do you remember in Egypt when the Israelites came out and Pharaoh with his however many hundred chariots was it 600 chariots, chased them down, and they go down this gorge in the desert, and what's right in front of them? Well, to the side of them, there's rocks, murderous cutthroat army, and in front of them a sea. And they can do absolutely nothing, and they are totally vulnerable. And the threat is bearing down upon them, and it looks like the threat is going to win. Just like at the moment, it looks like the king of Assyria is going to get the last word. And in that moment, Moses cries out, "Be still and see the salvation of the Lord." And what happened to the water? Whoosh. And those places that you can see there in verses 28, 29, 30, 31 is a description of the Assyrians marching down right up to the door of Jerusalem, right on the edge. And everybody will have lost total hope. There is nothing within us that can save us. What hope is there? We're about to be destroyed. And at that moment, the Lord will step in so that no one else can take the glory. So that they will have a renewed heart and a posture of depending uniquely and totally upon him, rather than earthly kings and rather than their own self-salvation projects. And in many ways, when it looks hopeless, that's when the Lord does his best work. This is all a little bit of a picture warming us up to the most pivotal event of human history. Because there came a day when the hand of the Lord's wrath was raised up, and it fell down Not upon his people, but upon who? His Son. And in that moment, as his Son drained the wrath that was against his people, opening up a day when people could return, people looked up and said, there's no hope. He's on a cross. What possible good thing could come out of this? And 3 days later, he rose victorious. And one of the lessons you can get as you sit at the cross is there really is no way for me to save myself. I have to trust in God's power to put right what is wrong, to draw near what is far, to bring grace to the undeserving. And if I start to believe that and trust in that, then I am opening the possibility to seeing the whole of life differently. You're going to have people do things to you that are difficult, and you'll say, why on earth is this happening? And you'll want to take matters into your own hands. You'll see movements in the geopolitical scene and pumped into our telly and all kinds of crazy ideas about how we should live, almost all of which are devoid of any acceptance that there is a God who is working out his purpose even through ignorant and arrogant people who've got their own agenda. It will mean that we've got a bit more of a pause and a calm when unsettling things happen. Because we know that even in the midst of bad things going on, God can be fulfilling his purposes. If we're one of those people who sit there and feel deeply the injustices that we or others suffer, because we know that there is a God who is both good and angry, and that he cares about those things even more than we do, then there will be a poise and a calm that comes over us. So what will be the cry of our heart after this sermon? What are we supposed to do with it? Answer: be not afraid of the kings and the bad people, but let your heart come back to him in fear and confidence. We're going to sing, O Great God. Let's do that now.